In today's episode, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Dr. Josie Perry. Now, Josie is a chartered psychologist that works with those in sports, on the stage, and in business to help them overcome their barriers to success so they all can achieve their goals. In our conversation today, we discuss Josie's brand new book, ADHD in Sports, Strategies for Success. And we unpack her research on the following: understanding the sporting brain, understanding how ADHD impacts sports performance. We talk about well-being, training, and competition strategies for athletes with ADHD. And finally, we talk about tips for coaches on how to best support and guide their athletes who have ADHD on their teams. Now, listen, I know you're going to have so many great takeaways from this conversation. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this talk with Dr. Josie Perry. Dr. Josie Perry, welcome to the Being Champions podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited, Josie. I woke up this morning. I knew we were going to have this conversation. I've been kind of watching the clock all day, just really excited to connect with you, learn from you. I absolutely loved your book. Reason being is, and I talked briefly to you about this before we hit record, was for me, like the whole reason I started this podcast was to create a platform and space for us as coaches. And a lot of time coaching education just kind of dives into tactics and strategies, right? But we're not armed or equipped with connection or leadership or talking about culture and mental performance and meeting our athletes where they're at. So when I came across your book, ADHD in Sports, I was like, yes, I need to dive into this book because one, I have a 9-year-old son who has ADHD, and two, just thinking about the environment we create as coaches. So that is why I'm so fired up to have you on today.
Thank you. I love that bit about meet the athlete where they are at, and not just athletes. What I really found with the research for the book was that exercise is so helpful for anyone with ADHD.
Yeah.
If we can make the sports environment a place that is welcome for those with ADHD, we can open up so many more doors to them. We can give them a safe place to hang out and be themselves. And that feels like a real opportunity.
Yeah, I love it. And before we unpack your book, Josie, I would love for you to share to our listeners a little bit about your background, what you do in sports, and just share a little bit about your background.
My background's probably not what you'd expect.
Right.
My first job was in Washington, D.C. As an intern for CBS News on the day the Monica Lewinsky story broke. So back in 1997. So I came over from London, where I lived, to do a year's exchange at a SUNY school in upstate New York, and then ended up in DC for 6 months. That was utterly awesome. I loved it. I loved the news cycle. I loved the communication side. And then when I went back to the UK, I ended up working in news for quite a while. And then I moved into communications. And my sport was Ironman triathlon.
Okay.
So nice. I had a great time before children, traveling around the world with my husband, doing Ironman races. It was awesome. And we went over to Melbourne in Australia to do the Ironman there. And I was standing on the beach about to get in the water, utterly terrified because the waves were horrific. And the guys on the tannoy said, "You can't control those waves. You can control how you feel about them." And it was the first time I've ever gone, if I used my brain, I could be a better athlete. It just never really occurred to me to connect kind of brain and body in that way. And I got in the water and I had my fastest ever Ironman race that day. And when I got home, I was like, I want to explore this so much more. There's got to be more about this sports psychology side. I took it quite seriously. I went back to university, quit my job, 5-year process to retrain as a sports psychologist, which I didn't realize when I started out, but it's big ask. I fully qualified in 2018. And so I run my own private practice in London, but I will work with athletes all over the world, helping them mainly to perform under pressure. So I've been working a lot. I call them my VIPs.
Yeah.
very intelligent perfectionists.
I
Um,
love that.
and yeah, I realized those athletes were having a lot of performance anxiety. And the things they had in common, they were highly intelligent, very perfectionistic, um, often mono identity around their sport. Their
Yeah.
sport was their everything.
Yeah.
They were what they did.
Yeah.
And then more recently, in the last 3, 4 years, I was just noticing more and more of them had ADHD or either diagnosed or were showing signs of it.
Yeah.
And I wanted a book to give them to be able to kind of go, right, go off, read, learn more about yourself. And
Yeah.
that's when I realized there wasn't a book. So, being me, I wrote it.
I love that. And it's the first book on ADHD in sports. And
It
again, like
is, yeah.
just getting that information out. And what I heard you say, Josie, and I love this. There's an expression talking about waves. So you're afraid of the waves. And one thing I tell our athletes all the time is you can't control the waves, but you can learn how to surf.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I forgot where I got the expression was, but it's one of those things. And again, it's just focusing on mindset. And that's a huge pillar we did this year on our campus was just focusing on that mental game, right? And making sure we understand how to handle the pressure. We know, anxiety's got to show up. We know these things are going to show up, but how can we better handle it? And again, working with our coaches, better equipping them with some tools and strategies. So again, looking at your book in ADHD, I was wondering, can we kind of start our conversation about what is ADHD and start there and we'll go through your book from there.
So, ADHD is it's a neurodevelopmental difference.
Yeah.
So, although the actual word will talk about disorder, I don't believe it is a disorder, but I
Yeah.
do believe it's a difference.
Yeah.
And I think that if you have a brain that is wired differently, and we
Yeah.
think about 20% in the population probably do, across one of the 6 different kind of neurodivergent neurotypes, then life is a lot harder because
Yeah.
you're tired,
Yeah.
you're exhausted, you're having to try and either mask or you're having to try and figure out the world around you as you're living in it.
Yeah.
And that can make life a lot harder. So I often say it isn't a disability, but it can feel quite disabling at times when you're having to live in a world that is just not designed with your brain in mind.
Yeah.
At the moment, we talk about 3 types of ADHD.
Yeah.
So there's the combined type, which we think about 60% of people have. Then there's an inattentive type. We often see that more in girls. They're often talked about as being quite daydreamery. I don't know if
Yeah.
that works
Yeah.
across the US. It's a very
Yeah.
British
Yeah.
phrase.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
daydream a lot. And then there's the hyperactive
Yeah.
type. So the hyperactive type is probably what we have in mind when we
Yeah.
think traditionally of ADHD. It's where a lot of the diagnoses were. It would be 5, 6, 7-year-old boys who could not sit still in class, were always being told off for talking or interrupting or being impulsive. And that's where many years ago all of the diagnoses were
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah.
We now know that females can have just as higher levels of ADHD, but they tend to internalize some of the issues more.
Yeah.
So it often shows up in things like anxiety and
Yeah.
feeling very different. And we also know lots of adults are now being diagnosed too. Someone did say to me that it's every time a child goes for diagnosis, an adult is diagnosed too, because
Yeah.
one of the parents will go, well, I don't know where they get it from, and
Right.
all these traits are totally normal. I have all these traits. And then the penny
Yeah.
drops and goes, oh, that's what's been going on. That's why life's been a bit harder.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure my wife had that conversation with me when we were with my son.
So yeah, we always say when one person's diagnosed, you probably
Yeah.
get actually 2 or 3 diagnosed
Yeah.
at the same time. So it is a disorder or a difference that's characterized by some hyperactivity, lots of inattention, emotional dysregulation, a range of different issues. We can talk about things like time blindness. So it's almost like there's no head clock.
Yeah. Yeah.
which obviously as coaches might well be infuriating if somebody can't pace properly for a session, or they're showing up late for every session. There might well be a lot of disorganization. That might be the person that's showing up without their kit
Yeah.
every single week and having to borrow kit. There might be impulsivity. That's the person that's yelling at the referee or the umpire because they haven't been able to get the right control over that impulsivity yet.
Yeah.
So it's a range of different traits that show up, and it's going to look different in every single person, which is why, I mean, within the book, I have a whole kind of tick list called the help or
Yeah.
hinder list,
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
can look at like, oh, I have that one. Does this help me? Does this hinder me?
Right. And I think that's a great transition, Josie. Thinking about your book and looking at chapter 1, you dive into understanding the sporting brain first, right? And you say a lot of times we're actually not, our brains aren't designed for high performance in sports, but can you
Right.
talk about the 3 different, like the key functions of your brain in performance?
Yeah, I think this is the absolute fundamental that athletes need to understand. I
Yeah.
also wish teachers in schools would teach
Yes.
this, because if we
Yeah.
can understand what's going on in our own head, we can change our behaviors when we need to. But I always describe it as there's 3 key functions that we all need to know about as athletes.
Yeah.
There's the habit function. And
Yeah.
apparently some scientist has figured out that we have to make 35,000 decisions every single day.
Crazy.
Most of those decisions, however, are tiny. So part of our brain might notice that we're thirsty. And so our eyes notice there's a drink nearby, our hand reaches out, we lift up that glass, we take a drink, we put it back down. That might be 20 decisions, but we do it all automatically because we haven't
Right.
got capacity to have to think about each of those decisions. So we love the habit function. And I always suggest about 90% of what you're doing on the sports field should be habit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lovely phrase we have in the UK from one of our rugby stars, which was, don't do something till you get it right. Do it until you cannot get it wrong.
Yes. I love that. Love it.
Yeah. And for any skills-based sport, I think that is so important, that when you've worked hard enough on that skill, it's gone into your habit function, you can draw upon it whenever you need it.
Yeah.
The habit function is always available to draw upon. Then we have our logic function, our decision-making area. We probably want about 10% of what we're doing on the sports pitch to be coming from there. So if a ball is coming towards you and there's 2 or 3 different things you could do with that ball as an athlete, that part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, is going to light up. It's going to drill back to our hippocampus, which is where memory, knowledge, learning sit. And that part of our brain is going to tell us the answer, and the prefrontal cortex will tell our body what to do. And if we're well trained, well practiced, we've got a few years in our sport, we'll probably make a pretty good decision. And if you just had your habit function and your logic function working, life would be good.
Yeah.
You would live up to the level of potential, you'd live up to the level of the training that you've been doing and the fitness you've got, and you would get the outcome that you should get in every single match that you play.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, obviously there's a however. Our brain is not designed for us to be athletes in any sport. Our brain is designed for survival.
Yes.
And that means we have a very specific part of our brain. It's called our amygdala. Apparently it looks like 2 almonds, very, very tiny, right in the center of our brain. And its job is to keep us alive. And so it has a threat function where it's like constantly scanning for threat. With a lot of my juniors, I talk about it being a bit like a meerkat. Where it's like the meerkat pops out of the sand and it's looking around for like, what kind of threat have I got coming towards me?
Yeah.
And we talk about 3 types of threat. There's physical threat. And to be fair, most sports that we're certainly going to be teaching in schools are pretty safe.
Yeah.
Although I've been working with some golfers down in Florida recently who tell me that, yes, there are gators on some of the courses.
It gets a little hazardous down there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't go in the water.
So fair enough. They do have some physical threats. But most of us don't. But then we have psychological threats. What if I'm not good enough? What if I'm judged? What if I fail? What if I let mum and dad down? What if I let my coach down? All of those things.
Yeah.
And then we have physiological threats. So your heart rate goes up, something doesn't feel right, or you're coming back from an injury and something hurts. And so that threat system will notice a physiological threat or a psychological threat, and it will flip. So we talk
Yeah.
about flipping the lid. When
Yeah.
it flips the lid, emotions are involved. The threat system is emotional, it's irrational, it thinks catastrophically. And we cannot access good quality decision making in that moment. So
Yeah.
it becomes really tricky. And this is why I think it's so much harder for my VIPs and those with
Yeah.
ADHD. Because if you're highly intelligent, your brain's job is a prediction machine. It's trying to figure out what might happen to you. And you get super good at working out all of the negatives that could happen and all the bad things.
We are really good at
it. And if you're perfectionistic, you're never going to be able to live up to the standards that you've tried to set for yourself. So you're constantly going to feel under threat. If you've got a mono identity, if you are your sport, then every single time you play your sport, it's going to feel threatening. And if you have ADHD, you are constantly striving to fit into a world that's not been designed with your brain in mind. And you're trying to focus, and you're trying to stifle your hyperactivity so you don't annoy people, and you're trying to show the coach you're listening, even though your way of listening might be to move about or to pick up things and to fidget with them. So your threat system tends to trigger much, much more, and you need to spend much more energy trying to keep it under control.
And as you're talking about that, I immediately think about chapter 3, where you're talking about the influence that ADHD has on sports performance, right? And we have areas of deficits, but then we also have some benefits. So I was wondering if you could talk about those two different areas, the deficits, but then the benefits of having ADHD in sports performance.
Yeah. So when I started drafting the book, I planned to have a chapter on the benefits and a chapter on the deficits. I got 2 pages on the benefits and about 30 on the deficits.
Right.
So it's not the kind of the superpower that some people talk about. There are some benefits. And the benefits are why I think that we would probably find the numbers of those with ADHD are much higher in sport than in other areas. Because if you're a 6-7-year-old child with hyperactivity, your parents are going to put you into, or your carers are going to put you into so many sports, right? They want to wear you out. They want to get you tired. You get signed up for everything. You've got the energy, so you're probably pretty good because you're enthusiastic. You've got the hyper focus, which means you really, really focus on it. You're going to get good quick. You get spotted. You get sent off to extra coaching. So suddenly in school, you're being told off all the time. There's one statistic I read in the preparation that said by the age of 10, someone with ADHD will have been told off 20,000 more times than someone without, because they're moving, they're jiggling about, they need something to play with. So if you get that in school, but you go play sport and suddenly you're good because you work really hard, you're hyper-focused, you've had great coaching, that's your safe place. You're going to work so much harder. So suddenly sport becomes the thing you are awesome at. On top of that, some elements of ADHD, things like impulsivity, can be good in certain sports. A lot of the athletes I interviewed for the book talk about patterns of play, how they could see patterns on a pitch. There was a US soccer player in the book I interviewed for it, and she was talking about how she could just see everything way before it happened, way before a coach yelled at her. So she was phenomenally good like that. And then in some sports, I would estimate a high number of basketball players have ADHD, because I think that dopamine buzz from the amount you can score in a basketball game will be a real boost. You play soccer, you score like 1-2 goals in a match if you're lucky. If you play basketball, you can shoot dozens. So I think there will be some sports that are beautifully designed for someone with an ADHD brain. Others, although to be fair, Adam Peaty, who's one of the best swimmers that GB has ever created, has talked
Yeah.
about having ADHD. Swimming often doesn't feel particularly well suited
Yeah.
because it's quite a boring sport to train
Yeah.
in. It's
Yeah.
8-10 sessions a week of 6-7 kilometers of back and forth at a time. And also ADHD can mess up your sleep pretty badly.
Yeah.
We think about 70% of those with ADHD have delayed sleep onset by about an hour and a half. So you fall
Yeah.
asleep much later, right?
Yeah.
And if you've got to get up at 5:30 for pool time, because that's the only time you can get your swim sessions in, then you're going to drop out of that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So it definitely feels like there are some sports where the benefits show up more.
Yeah.
But there are also traits that can really help that. Patterns of play can be incredibly helpful. The hyper focus can
Yeah.
be really beneficial. The additional energy that you've got can be brilliant.
Yeah.
So yes, there are benefits, but pretty much every athlete I interviewed for the book said, please don't talk about it as a superpower, because
Right. Yeah.
yes, there are benefits, but someone talked about there are snipers, and the
Yeah. Yeah.
snipers will come out and they will make life really, really hard, with sensory issues, with the ease of distraction, with the emotional overwhelm, with the additional fatigue,
Yeah.
with the impulsivity. All of those things can make it harder to be an athlete.
Yeah, and Josie, as you talk, I mean, of course, I'm thinking about my son, and
Yeah.
it's just like all those things, like the pattern recognition. Like he's 9 and he's on the soccer field, right? In typical 9-year-old soccer, everyone's hoarding around the ball, and I see my son drifting off like into space, and so you see him having the patterns, right? And he's great at chess, so he destroys me in chess all
Yeah.
the time, like destroys me all the time, and lets me know it. Right. But then I see all the other stuff that you're talking about and the struggle he has as far as the sleep and how long it takes for him to fall asleep and all that stuff. By the time he gets home, he's exhausted, especially being in the classroom, right? That's not designed for him. He's just mentally
No.
exhausted, right? So I see all those things in my son. And then, after reading your book, I really started to like see it in some of our athletes. So again, this is why I love reading your book and having the chance to talk to you was it just brought awareness to me, not just as a parent, but as a coach, to be able to recognize these things and understand that ADHD is not this superpower. I'm not just going to throw my athlete in there just to get some energy out and he's going to be fine. There's so many other factors that we have to take into account.
I mean, one of the ones that really struck me was the US soccer player was playing in the UK and she was playing in the FA Cup final,
Yeah,
which for soccer in the UK, it's the biggest deal there
it's
is, right?
huge,
It's
huge. Yep.
massive. It's your Super Bowl, but for us, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
she's playing in the FA Cup final at Wembley, which is our biggest stadium. And obviously amazingly exciting, but the kit didn't quite fit properly because female kit is often just men's kit that's
yeah,
shrunk down a
yeah.
bit. Walk out onto the pitch, there's fireworks.
Oh, yeah,
The noise is
yeah,
phenomenal. And then at Wembley, you have advertising borders around the edge of the pitch that are constantly changing. They're scrolling through different advertising. Well, if you get distracted easily and you're supposed to be focused on a ball, but you've just got massive advertising borders constantly in your eye line,
yeah,
moving the whole time, how are you supposed to focus? And
yeah.
then those kind of matches are the ones where the coaches get really excited and they're
Oh,
really
yeah, yeah,
involved. And they're on the sideline, right? We call it joystick coaching. They're on the
yeah,
sideline
yeah,
telling their athletes what to do. And there's an athlete going, I've got amazing pattern recognition. I can tell you what's going to happen. I know that that ball's going to come from there and I need to get it to so and so. I'm
yeah,
playing the game. And yet you've got somebody yelling in your ear, telling you something that might be different. So confusing.
yeah,
Um, so there are lots of these snipers that one of the athletes talked about that she said just
oh,
feels
yeah,
like they're like hiding around every corner. And until you're in that moment, it's very hard to plan for them.
yeah,
So until you're doing something for the second or third time, you don't even know to look out for it. And your
Yeah.
coaches probably don't know to
Nope.
look out for it either. And another athlete who was on meds talked about they had a cricket tour to the Middle East, and you're only allowed to take 28 days worth of meds
Oh yeah.
on
Yep.
tour with you, right?
Yep.
But they go for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So she has to work out what days she can be medicated and feel like she can do her normal training and her normal preparation, and which days she would go to breakfast and then go straight back to bed because she was
Right.
just so fatigued without it.
Yeah.
So there's all these elements we just wouldn't, as coachings, we just wouldn't think about. But yet these athletes are having to deal with them.
Yeah, and Josie, and I work in the youth sports level at high school and middle school, and now I see even an added element that our athletes have to go through with these over involvement with parents. So you have coaches yelling instructions, you have parents yelling instructions. Our kids' anxiety is already through the roof, and all these things are happening. And now throw in ADHD. Like imagine
Yeah.
that kid in that moment and trying to navigate that environment, right? It's so
Yes,
hard.
it is. And in that first chapter, when I talk about the brain, we
Yeah,
also talk about the four responses that we all would have to our threat system going off. And the ones we always talk about are fight or flight.
yeah,
So we don't tend to see people fighting. Um,
yeah,
the fighty people are the people that get really chatty before a
yeah.
match. So they'll be in a changing rooms, a locker room, talking a lot. Then we have the flight people. They'll have quit. This was too
Yeah,
much for them. They're not
they're
putting
done.
up
Yep.
this. Then we have the fawn people, and they tend to come from sports where you've got quite abusive coaching going on.
Yeah,
In the
yeah,
UK, I see that in sports like crew, rowing,
yeah,
gymnastics, field hockey can have some quite harsh coaching, and they have a
yeah,
fawn response to that. What I will often see with ADHD athletes, particularly those highly intelligent perfectionists, is a freeze response. They shut
yeah,
down. Like,
yeah,
I don't want to be here. I'll do it. They'll always show up and play, but they'll be very, very quiet and they
yeah,
will not want to engage. And athletes are always saying to me, I wish my coach understood I do not need to be motivated.
yeah,
They are so motivated on their own. They don't need someone going, yay, we're going to go win this match.
yeah.
That doesn't help.
No,
They need someone that's going to take all that pressure off them. I was like, well, what's the one thing you need to focus on when you go out there today? Okay,
yeah,
you go do that. That's
yeah.
all they need because they're highly, highly motivated. They
Oh
don't
yeah,
need someone pushing them, go get that game. Not helpful in the slightest.
yeah.
Um, so the more coaches can see that and spot the different threat responses that are showing up in their athletes, the better they can change the way they try to motivate them.
Yeah, and that's what I loved about the flow of your book, Josie. And I love doing this in all our conversations on our podcast or when I'm just talking with coaches is, we dive into the what first. Like what is ADHD? What are the deficits? What are the benefits? But the critical piece for me is the how. So how do we create the environment? So that kind of transitions to your chapter 5 where you start talking about some of the training strategies. And there was two that I loved, Josie, was coins and creating a communication passport. So I was wondering if you
Oh,
could
I love
talk.
that because they're my two favorites too.
I was wondering if you could talk about those too. So now transitioning to the how. So we know all the what, but how do we actually build in better training strategies, or how can our kids
Yeah.
build in better training strategy? And talk about coins and the communication passport.
Yeah, so I'll start with the communications passport. Literally, I've just been working with an athlete on doing exactly this
Yeah,
so that when they go, they're on a full ride scholarship in the
yeah,
US. When they go back to school in August, they will have a sheet of paper that they can give to their coach to say, if you want the best out of me, this is what I need.
yes,
And the coach can do the same back,
yeah,
saying, if you want to get the best out of my coaching, this is what I need.
yeah,
But it's just so helpful to have something black and white that says, this triggers my threat system.
yeah,
This makes my ADHD worse. If my threat system's been triggered, this is what's the best thing to say to me.
yeah,
This is the breathing pattern that helps me the most. This is what I need when we go away to tournaments.
yeah,
Because of the sleeping issue, a lot of athletes with ADHD get really worried about sleeping away at
yeah,
camps or at tournaments. So to either be able to have a room on their own or to have strategies, or the food can be very tricky with ADHD too.
Yeah.
So any of those elements. So I mean, I've put some questions in the book that you can ask, but it really is a case of going, what gets the best out of me?
Yeah.
And actually that came from in the corporate world, we do a lot of personality profiling
Yeah.
in big corporate
Yeah. Yeah.
organizations, right?
Yeah.
And often you will get a couple of sheets of paper when you've done your profiling that says, this is you, this is
Yeah. Yeah.
how you
Yeah.
work at your best, that kind of thing.
Here are your strengths, all that. Yep.
Yeah, strengths, weaknesses, where you're stretched, where you're most comfortable. The most helpful one of those I ever did in the corporate world was one that also gave you a piece of paper back and said, give this to anyone you work with. Because it was like, this is how you get what you need from me. Don't, if you're very, we call it red, it was in a specific one, but if you're very red, you're very driven, you're very kind of go-getter, instant decisions, don't give me a 3-page report full of waffle. I'm not going to read it. Give me 2 lines of what you want from me and a yes or no. So that kind of thing that you can give to a coach and they can give back just sets out in black and white, this is what I need. This is how we would work best together.
Yeah.
Coins, I use daily for myself.
Yeah.
And I don't have ADHD, but I just find it so helpful. And it's the idea that every morning when you wake up, we get 100 coins to spend.
Yeah.
And those coins are little modules of energy.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be exhausted when you go to bed in case something happens. You need to build up a little bit of credit. So you're probably going to spend 90 coins each day. And you can earn coins, but you need to be really conscious of where are you spending your coins. Because if you overspend, you get burnout. And athletes with ADHD will burn out a lot quicker than others. So we really need to help them spend their coins effectively. And that might be as a coach thinking about their scheduling. So if they've got crazy busy school days where they're really busy back-to-back lessons, and then we're putting in a gym session for strength and conditioning work before school, and then we're also giving them a practice after school, and then they've also got something else, they're going to shut down pretty quick. So for example, when I'm setting up my schedule, if I work with a junior athlete, that's probably about 20 coins for me, because I find them harder work because I have to think in teenage language and I have to use different analogies. Right. So I have to put my head in their world, and that's a bit more draining. Whereas if I work with an adult, particularly an adult in a sport that I do, probably only about 5 coins. Because I get the sport, I don't have to think in a different language, it's much more comfortable. So I couldn't do 5 junior sessions in a day. I'd be exhausted. But I could do 5 adult sessions, no problem. So I will literally work my diary out based on that kind of coin strategy. And then I will also think about, oh, that's quite a heavy day. Is there anything else I could do to earn back coins? So for me as a triathlete, if I go to the pool and I do a hard swim session with my swim squad, then that's probably 20 coins. I'm going to be tired. It's an hour, really exhausted. But if I go to the nice pool and I do an easy 1 mile swim, and then I sit in the spa area with the bubbles and the nice stuff, listening to music, it'll earn me back some coins. So on a hard day, I'll do the nice bubbly pool, and I know I can take on a bit extra. So coaches really understanding where they're spending their own coins, because we're not going to be a great coach if we're overstretched and we've used up all our coins that day. And then for our athletes, being able to understand when they might be overspending coins. And particularly some areas might be more exhausting to an athlete with ADHD, particularly some of the social side sometimes might, then it's really worth thinking about, well, what are we making them do too much? Are we giving them enough rest and recovery time so that they can be better for the next practice?
I love how you bring up the coaching part of it too, because I mean, I always say, and I got this from Cody Royal, he says, coaches, we are performers too. And we have to see ourselves as performers. So if we're burning out all our coins before even a training sessions, we're not going to show up the best version of ourselves. And then Josie, thinking about our athletes with ADHD and shifting to the competition strategies, and that's going into your chapter 8. The two that I was kind of pairing with coins and communication passport was dealing with the waiting mode, right? And
Yeah.
with our ADHD having the time blindness, or I think about my son, if he has a 4 o'clock game, like I'm going to hear about that game 27 times. Like, when's the game coming up? When's the game, Dad? When is it 4 o'clock? And then thinking about the threat mode that you're talking about and this if then training and how we can better equip and better plan. So could you talk about those two strategies as far as
Yeah.
competition?
Yeah. So waiting mode, I find fascinating because again,
Yeah.
you've got that the time blindness of not being able to have an internal head clock.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so you think everything takes 20 minutes, whether it takes
Yeah.
5 minutes or an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
And known for either being late for for practice or for showing up, or on time, but it's used an awful lot of energy to show
Yeah.
up on time, and so
Yeah.
probably quite frustrated when they get there. Waiting mode tends to mean if you have got a big competition, something that matters to you, you are so intent that you can't be late. You're doing nothing else that day. And
Yeah.
you'll have people that are just sitting there going, I can't schedule in, I can't coin my day. It's like, no, everything is waiting for that 4 o'clock match.
Yeah.
So yes, it's really helpful to be aware of that. And in the book, we have some strategies so that you can still get to the match, but you don't lose
Yeah.
a whole day of practice or schoolwork
Yeah.
or anything else you need to be doing.
Yeah.
If then planning comes from a wider area called what if planning.
Yeah.
So with what if planning, we have these are all of the worries in my head.
Yeah.
And we know for some great research that just writing down those worries,
Yeah.
when they test it at the University of Chicago, just writing down the worries before an exam rather than chatting to your friends moved grades up from something like a B minus to a B plus.
Yeah. It's huge.
So it's a really, really important strategy to write down your worries.
Yeah.
But if you do it early enough, you can then next to those worries go, how do I prevent that worry coming true?
Yeah.
And it helps you to start goal setting a little bit with like, well, if I'm worried about, I know, losing my spot on the team, how might I prevent that coming true? Well, I could practice this, this, and this. I could write a skills strategy of what I want to work on over this season. And you've got some plans then. And then the if then is like, but if it were to happen, what would I do?
Yeah.
Because in the moment, our threat system is going to trigger.
Yeah.
My favorite example of this, right? We have the Tour de France starting in about a month's time in the UK.
Yeah.
Well, not
Yeah.
in the UK, in Europe, in France,
Yeah.
that we all love watching. And I always love watching a mountain day because you'll have 3 or 4 guys that go off up the mountain, and all that they will have in their heads as they've gone off ahead of the peloton will be, oh my goodness, I could win this.
Yeah.
I could win a stage of the Tour de France. That's my life mate. That's, I know, 20 grand in bonus money. This is amazing, right?
Yeah.
So their threat systems are highly, highly triggered because they're thinking about the outcome. And it's outcomes that trigger our threat system. And one of them will get a mechanical. And instead of an if then plan would see them get a mechanical, notice, stop, take off the wheel, have a gel or something that gives them some energy, wait for the neutral car to come, grab a bike, catch up with that group. They would be fine. Yeah. But they don't because their threat system is triggered. They're focused on the outcome. They haven't done the if then planning. They're throwing that bike down the side of a mountain. And then we all get to watch them toddling off down the mountain in their bike shoes, trying to get their £15,000 bike that they've just thrown away. So I think that bit's really helpful, that if we have pre-prepared what we would like to do in that moment, it will be so much better.
Yeah, I love it. So I got this, it's a very similar concept. So Ashton Eaton, former decathlete for Team USA, he called it bulletproofing, where he would go through, decathlete, you have to go through 10 events, and he would bulletproof himself for every single scenario. Okay, what if I get no points in the 100? Or what if I no height in high jump? What is my response going to be? So the biggest thing, and we talk to our student athletes a lot about this, is getting away from reaction mode and make sure we're responding. It's going to be easier to respond if I have that plan in place. Like if I have this,
Yes.
if this happens, then I will do this. So I'm going to bulletproof myself for every scenario. So then we see our athletes starting to trend in the right way, making the right decisions. Because again, if we trigger our threat mode, we cannot make decisions in the moment.
Nope.
And so again, it's just trying to equip our athletes. And so with that, Josie, like now I'm thinking more from the coaching lens. And you talk about this in chapter 9. And I heard this line you said in one of your podcasts, and it was talking about one of the athletes you interviewed. And she said, the day I got diagnosed, I realized I wasn't a broken horse. I was a zebra. And I
Yeah,
absolutely love that, Josie, because again, for me, it's about how do we meet our athletes where they're at? So can you give us
totally.
some tips and strategies as from a coach, how do we make a better environment that helps neurotypical and neurodivergent athletes?
I would start with the more you talk about this stuff, the better. Something I found really sad when I was interviewing the athletes was a few of them talked about how they had got brave enough to disclose their ADHD to their coaches.
Yeah,
Like, I would love to be in a place where no one thinks they have to disclose
right. And be brave to
anything,
do that.
right? Like,
Yeah,
or be brave about it. Like, it's just part of who you are.
yeah,
The fact you feel you have to disclose almost puts some shame in there,
yeah,
and there shouldn't be any shame in there. So that bit was like, and what was even sadder was that some of them said when they did that, a couple of the coaches just kind of shrugged it and went, "All right, thanks," but it was
yeah,
never mentioned again.
yeah,
So it was kind of like all of that angst that it had to go through, and it was just brushed into the distance.
yeah,
Um, and there was a mum of a netball player who I interviewed who said it's so hard because her daughter was such a good player, but the way that selection was done for team selection meant she never got long enough on the netball court to be able to get into her flow and show what she could do. And
yeah,
she would be instantly almost discredited by the coaches because she couldn't stand still to listen to the instructions. She'd be dancing around because that was her way of
yeah,
focusing. And so the
yeah,
coaches thought she didn't care and didn't really want it. And it was only when it got to national team selection that it was done differently and there were higher playing players there that they got longer on court and the coaches understood what you might see in an ADHD athlete. And she got
yeah,
into the national team. But those lower level teams, because the coaches didn't know what to look out for and they assumed that moving about meant you weren't listening rather
yeah,
than there are different ways of listening.
yeah,
Um, so I would just say, not just because I want to sell lots of copies of the book, but the more coaches that can read the book
yeah,
and understand and notice going, oh, and and every conference I've been to talking about this since the book came out, someone has come up to me at the end and went, I have just recognized so many athletes in different
right.
traits that you're talking about. Do I need to get them diagnosed? And I'm like, no. If they
Yeah,
if you don't feel comfortable with that, if they don't want a diagnosis, you don't, no one needs a diagnosis necessarily. Some people find that that label is very valuable. It makes them realize they're not the broken horse, they are a zebra.
yeah,
But you can, as a coach, if you start to spot some of the traits, you can just adapt around those traits. So literally the coaching chapter has these are the traits you might notice, and next to each trait, here's some things you can do.
yeah,
And what a lot of coaches have said to me is actually a lot of the suggestions are things that just make you a really good coach.
yeah,
So one of the things to really look out for as a coach is something called rejection sensitivity.
yes, yeah,
So where an athlete will not take, you might have intended to say something quite complimentary to them, but the
right.
athlete has a negative filter on it. So you might say, oh, you played really well today. Their filter has heard that as you played awfully last week. And you'd be
Right. Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
why did they respond that way? I was saying something
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't get it. But understanding that, a lot of the athletes said the worst thing a coach could say to me is, oh, have you got 5 minutes after the game today? I'd really like to chat to you.
Yeah.
Right? If you've got rejection sensitivity, you've now lost that game. No way you can play the game because
Yeah.
all your head is on is like, I'm going to be deselected after the match.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
they're
What did
throwing
I
me
do?
out of the
Yeah,
team. Something's wrong. I've messed up. So being really, really clear about why you would want to talk to somebody, giving people a real heads up, helping with transitions, um, never telling people off in front of others. That shame element, if you've got ADHD, when you've probably spent an awful lot of time at school being told off, is going to be highly attuned. And so I know somebody shows up late to practice, you're annoyed because it means they've missed the warm up and they're messing up patterns or they're messing up plans that you had. But you shouting at them in front of the whole team, it embarrasses them, it shames them. They're
yeah,
not going to be able to perform properly anyway. It might make somebody feel better for 5 minutes that they've been able to release that anger, but it doesn't help the practice that you've got. So there are lots of elements about actually just being a really good coach and thinking about the athlete in front of you and how do you get the best from them.
yeah,
So yes, they might have done some things that feel disrespectful or are frustrating to you, but you are wasting that practice time and you are not going to get the best out of the athlete in front of you if you show that annoyance or those frustrations. So that element you talked about right up front about kind of athlete at the center of it is so important.
yeah. I love it, Josie, and I want to be respectful of time. So I was wondering if there's anything you want to wrap up with, anything you've learned since the book has been released, any big takeaways that you've taken that you've heard from coaches that they've learned, just anything you want to wrap up to kind of close out our conversation today.
I guess the biggest thing actually is, and there's a chapter on it, is about medication.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. And I'm not a psychiatrist. So in the UK, it's psychiatrists that will give medication. And obviously for high level athletes, there's issues around WADA and needing therapeutic use exemptions. I definitely went into this thinking, oh, medication sounds like it's amazing. And there are many people, you can watch many podcasts, listen to many podcasts with people talking about how incredibly helpful medication can be. And it can be. However, there are additional side effects that might well show up for athletes around heart rate speeding up, around body temperature, and particularly around food. We know athletes with ADHD are more likely to have disordered eating. And if you take a medication that suppresses your appetite for 8 hours at a time, it becomes very hard to fuel yourself effectively. So I think that's the one that surprised me of like, I came a lot more cautious and really understanding medication. And so I think if there's parents that listen to this or coaches that are thinking about suggesting it needs more thought for a student athlete than it might need for others with ADHD.
I love it. And Josie, I'm sitting here with so many takeaways on my end. I know how much value added to our listeners. If they do want to reach out and learn more from you, what's the best place for them to connect with you and follow some of your work?
So I have a website called performanceinmind.co.uk, and there's a section on there called Performance Zone. So there's a whole ADHD section in there, but there's also sections on brilliant books that you might want to read if you're coaching athletes, how to get more confidence out, motivation, all these different elements of sports psychology are on there.
Okay, awesome. And Josie, I got to congratulate you because you also started your own podcast, Be Braver. I've dove into the first couple of episodes. I love it. So for our coaches out there, or anyone listening, check out Be Braver. Definitely look at Josie's book, ADHD in Sports. Again, for me, it's all about awareness and educating us beyond just tactics and strategies. So Josie, I can't thank you enough for joining us on the Being Champions podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you. We'll catch up soon.
Brilliant.
All right. Thank you. Hey, listen, I hope you all enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Josie Perry. I'm sitting here with a whole bunch of notes and a whole bunch of takeaways again. And I was so excited to get Josie on this podcast because of her subject and her research about ADHD. Again, there's never been a book written about ADHD in sports, but we're seeing it more and more with our Gen Z athletes and our Gen Alpha athletes, where ADHD is coming up more and more. About 20% of our athletes on our teams have ADHD. And I think the thing that hit me and struck me the most was when Josie says, our athletes with ADHD are walking into environments that are not designed for their brain, right? And that just hit me, and it just made me take a step back and look at my own environment that I create on a daily basis for my athletes as a coach. And it's having the awareness of what our athletes are going through when they have ADHD, right? And it's really meeting them where they are at and not where we expect them to be. And I think that's important. We do that with all our athletes, neurotypical or neurodivergent, right? We have to meet our kids where they're at. We have to get a deeper understanding beyond just being an athlete, beyond just understanding the tactics and knowledge and strategies for our sports. It's really connecting on that deeper level so we can create an environment where everyone can thrive and discover the best version of themselves. So again, I'm just sitting here blown away from this conversation with Josie. I hope you all enjoyed it. I always appreciate you all tuning in and listening to the Being Champions podcast. And I hope you all jump in next week. Thanks a lot.